Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Just as a reminder, we are recording this event. For those of you who maybe did not attend our first event, our chapter launch back in April, my name is Leslie Steins, and I am the co-chapter leader of PEN America, Miami, South Florida. Thank you so much again for joining us in this fantastic celebration of Banned Books Week with PEN America. And to start us off, I'd like to just say a few words about PEN America's Banned Books Week. Across the United States, divisive book bans and censorious threats have taken hold in schools, academia, and the public square, particularly in regards to books that center racism, history, and diversity. These actions are an attack on the freedom to learn. Who is allowed to be heard? Who decides what can be heard? As individuals, it is our duty to provide the next generation of writers, teachers, journalists, activists, and readers with an education that includes all facets of life, an education that is free from unreasonable censorious threats. This discussion will address the vital role that children's and young adult literature plays in the process of education and how we can work to protect our youth from threats to free expression. I'm joining you all today from Savannah, Georgia, although originally I reside in Miami, Florida, which is the traditional territory of the Yamasee Muskogee people. I want to acknowledge this and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit. Before we get started, I would love for everyone who's joining us today to please introduce yourself into the chat down below and let us know where you're zooming in from. We will be dropping a tool into the chat now that will help you find the traditional name of your area. And while you populate the chat with that, just a couple other housekeeping notes before we get started on our very exciting conversation. I want to take this time to thank all of the people involved, our partners who helped us execute this fantastic event. First, I'd like to thank Books and Books, our local independent bookstore in Miami, who is also the official bookstore partner of the PEN America Miami South Florida chapter. I'd also like to extend our thanks to Miami Book Fair at Miami-Dade College for sponsoring this event. And of course, PEN America, my deepest thanks to my co-chapter leader, Marcy Calabretta-Cancio-Bello, who was instrumental in organizing this event, but unfortunately couldn't join us today. Rebecca Warner, who you'll see is a wizard in the chat, who's gonna help monitor that for us and is also dropping in some links so you can keep up with all the exciting resources that we're listing today. Grace Linzer, William Johnson, Sabrina Adams, thank you so much for all of your assistance in organizing this event. And of course, a big thank you to the PEN members in South Florida and across America. And thank you to you, all of you who have taken this time out of your Thursday to join us in celebration of Banned Books Week. Just as a quick note, I see a lot of us are familiarizing ourselves with the chat below, but for those of you who maybe are less familiar with Zoom, you'll notice at the bottom that there is a gray bar in which there is a chat bubble, and then there's also a Q&A function. Just as a reminder, we have set aside some time at the end of our moderated conversation for a Q&A with the audience. So if during the conversation you think of a question that you would like to share with our panelists, please feel free to drop that below in the Q&A bubble, and we will do our best to pose those questions at the end of the moderated conversation. Lastly, before I introduce our moderator, I just want to take a moment to provide a brief overview of this event and why we thought it important to bring it together. So in May, the use of Ghost Boys by Jewell Parker Rhodes was halted by Broward County Public Schools. The novel follows a 12-year-old Black boy from Chicago who was shot by police while playing with a toy gun. And so we wanted to bring together Jewell Parker Rhodes and who I'm about to introduce next, Kelly McWilliams, to discuss this, as well as the impact and importance of children's literature, representation, defending free expression. So all of that having been said, I am so thrilled and honored to be able to introduce our moderator for tonight, author Kelly McWilliams. Kelly McWilliams is a mixed race writer who has always gravitated towards stories about crossing boundaries and forging new identities. For this and so many other reasons, young adult literature will always be close to her heart. She is a graduate of the Walnut Hill School for the Arts and Brown University. Her young adult novel, Agnes at the End of the World, benefited from We Need Diverse Books mentorship program. McWilliams has crafted stories all her life, and her very first novel, Doormat, was published when she was just 15 years old. Doormat became a Junior Library Guild selection and led to a feature in 17 magazines. McWilliams has previously worked as a staff writer for Romper, covering issues important to women and families. When she's not writing, she's reading, cooking, with mixed results, as she says, or hiking. She lives in Colorado with her partner and young daughter, and her new YA book, Mirror Girls, is forthcoming from Little Brown in February 2022. So definitely stay tuned for that. I had the opportunity to speak with her very briefly about it, and it sounds absolutely incredible. So definitely keep it on your to watch list. With that having been said, please join me in welcoming Kelly McWilliams.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leslie, for that wonderful introduction and for bringing us all together today. I did want to say a few words about Jewell Parker Rhodes, who also happens to be my mother. So we are related. In full disclosure, so Jewell Parker Rhodes is the award-winning author of many books for youth, including the New York Times bestsellers Black Brother, and Ghost Boys, which has garnered over 30 awards and honors, including the Jane Addams Children's Book Award and Walter Dean Myers Award. Rhodes is also the author of Paradise on Fire, Towers Falling, and the celebrated Louisiana Girls trilogy, Ninth Ward, Sugar, and Bayou Magic. Rhodes has visited hundreds of schools across the country and is a regular speaker at colleges and conferences. So as Leslie mentioned, we're here because Ghost Boys, the use of Ghost Boys was halted in South Florida schools as the result of a letter from the district director of the Fraternal Order of Police. Ghost Boys, as was mentioned a little bit, is the story of Jerome, a 12-year-old boy, a Black boy who was killed by a white police officer who saw him handling a toy gun. As a ghost, Jerome witnesses the effects his death has on his community and his family and meets the ghost of Emmett Till, who helps him work through the meaning of his tragic death and its ties to systemic racism. This book was being taught as a supplemental text in a 5th grade classroom. Paul Kempinski, the district director of that Fraternal Order of Police, objected to its use in an open letter to the Broward County School Board, asking them to remove the book, and they did in fact halt its use. In the complaint, Kempinski wrote that this book convinces its reader, the children of our community, that police officers regularly lie as they routinely murder children while painting police officers as racists. The book was referred to as propaganda, and it was stated that it's inappropriate for children. Jewell, did you ever expect Ghost Boys to be banned on these grounds?
Oh, absolutely not. I was really shocked. I was really upset. And I think it also so belied my intent in writing the book. I didn't really want to write Ghost Boys. My editor mentioned, Jewell, do you want to write about this topic? And I knew in my heart that this would be the hardest book that I've ever written. And so I was reluctant because it was important for me to get it right, to show the humanity of all the characters. One of the things that you learn in fiction is that, you know, you have to love all your characters. So that means that I have to have empathy for every single character, including the police officer, you know, including his daughter and Carlos, and find the ways to structure a story so that kids don't think that I'm stereotyping anyone, because you can't say don't stereotype if in the book itself I stereotype. And also I wanted kids to have a chance to have that opportunity to have empathy for how other kids have different challenges in their lives. But I worked very hard in particular on all of them, because if someone says, you know, as this commissioner has said, that I stereotype the police officers or that I'm doing propaganda, then that is the antithesis of what I spent 2.5 years of my life trying to get right. I even had an agreement with my editor that if I did not get this book right, if I did not have the open and the nuances to show human frailties and yet have that empathy and love for the human spirit, then we wouldn't publish the book. So I guess maybe having the book banned, it still is really well read all over this country and all over the world. But it scares me when one organization, or in the case of California, one person can have a book removed. I think it's a danger to our citizenry, to our country. It's an assault on free expression.
Yes, and this book has been read in many fifth grade classrooms. It's become part of many curriculums. I know teachers and students write to you about it. What have reactions been to this story? Because I think when we see the headline, you know, that this book was banned from a county, we think, well, I mean, it's sort of natural to think that there must be something very provocative, very going on. Yeah.
And that's such an excellent point, because the book still bears that brunt of, yes, something's wrong, or it's not that good, you know. And that's sort of like an unfair judgment, particularly if you haven't read it, you know. And I want people to read it, because my work is all about love and empowering children that they can make a difference and make things better. The through line for the story is that no one should be judged by the color of their skin, that we are all one humanity. We are all, you know, one human family, and that we need to then get rid of racism, get rid of those biases that prevent us from really seeing one another and seeing the connection of heart, mind, and spirit between all of us.
And with that said, are you open to reading a little bit from Ghost Boys? Because I think, you know, it's very interesting that they said that it was propaganda when that's really antithetical to what a work of fiction does. And I think that the audience will hear right away that this can't be propaganda.
Well, yes, though I will say, because of this event, I went back to look through the novel, to look at the strategies that I did to open up the character of a police officer. And there's actually 3 key scenes, and I'm not going to read all of them, but the first scene where when they're having the grand jury investigation, where one of the lawyers asks the police officer, do you know about racism? Do you know the difference of racism or racial bias? Do you know that you could have, you know, unconscious racial bias? And so that opens up the door that, you know, it's much more complicated for why he reacted the way in which he did, killing a young man. But I am going to read from the court scene 130 to 131. And this is the approach. You thought the victim was a large man. Objection, not a question, Your Honor. Sustained. You were in fear for your life. Objection, not a question. Repeat testimony. Sustained. The judge leans forward. Even though she's trying to hide it, she's irritated. Do you have a question, counselor? Yes, I do, Your Honor. The prosecutor turns, walks away from the judge and officer. He looks at Pop, then turning back to the stand, says loudly, seriously, Why was the child shot in the back? Uproar, panic, stomping, hammers flashing. No photos, asserts the clerk. Reporters are shouting questions. Community activists are demanding justice. Ma, Pop, and Grandma huddle, cling, and cry. Order, order, the gavel bangs again and again. Officer Moore's wife shuts her eyes. Officer Moore looks pained. I see the skull beneath his face. The video shows me shot in the back. People knew. This is the first time the lawyer has said it, but everyone knew this moment would come. Sarah's parents, the other lawyer, my folks. He was running away. Why did you shoot? Sound dies. There is tense quiet. Like this second is the most important moment in the world. The answer unlocks the universe. I was in fear for my life. Officer Moore's eyes are bleak. You're under oath. I was in fear for my life, he says more forcefully. If I were alive, my whole body would be trembling. Officer Moore speaks, I think, a truth he believes. When truth's a feeling, can it be both? Both true and untrue? In truth, I feared for my life. And if you'll bear with me one more second, that cracks open the other door that Jerome empathizes from Officer Moore's perception, that maybe he really did think this was true, even though Jerome might think that he's lying. And it opens up this ambiguity that's very important. And I think with racial bias, there is a great deal of ambiguity, whether it's conscious or unconscious. But the very final thing where I think it shows how I was not demonizing anyone is when Jerome, after the police officer is set free, Jerome comes to see Sarah, and Sarah is the white police officer's daughter, and she can see the ghosts. She can see Jerome and Emmett. Why? Because she has a good, loving, non-biased, non-racist heart, and she's going to become the champion among others to change the world. So Jerome says, Sarah, I say, reappearing, you were right. It matters you seeing me seeing you, sharing my story. Sarah looks up at me. Her eyes are real, they have depth, their ice blue, sparkling with tears. If people know more about other people, she says, maybe they won't be scared. Like you weren't even scared of a ghost. Sarah laughs. You're going to tell the world about me? Yes, answers Sarah, and about anyone else hurt out of fear. Cops must get scared a lot, but they shouldn't get more scared just because someone's Black. Sarah twists her hands, inhales, exhales, and it goes on, but Jerome ends because Sarah's getting so upset. And he says, Sarah, tell me 3 good things about your dad. And she does. And the point is, in my view, is that humanity is flawed. And I do think racism or racial bias causes people and police officers to feel threatened unreasonably, but it also doesn't excuse them from de-escalation. It doesn't excuse them from the real actual events in which young Black kids have been shot in the back. They are the adults. But Jerome shows enormous compassion when he says to Sarah, basically, talk to your dad, remember the goodness, keep the conversation going. So the fact then that Jerome can have forgiveness or embrace ambiguity or embrace how racism and bias is so complicated that an adult reading the book couldn't see that, it really made me doubt my skills as a writer. But when I went back and looked at it, I can see the layering that I did over and over, trying so hard not to have anyone stereotype anyone else within the book.
Yes, and that was beautiful. And I do love this book. It's one of my very favorites that you've ever written. But I remember in May, like when we found out that this was happening, I wondered to myself, why does this police order feel that they need to have a final word over a work of fiction? You wrote a piece of fiction, a story trying to reach the hearts and minds of children. And somebody basically said, I'm going to leverage my power, the fact that my voice has often historically been considered the final one, and I'm going to say we shouldn't have this voice. And one of the things that we've seen is this great flourishing of diverse literature. We've had different types of people telling their stories. We're hearing different sides of a story. And then to have someone say that, no, that's not diversity, it's not difference, it's not a different experience, it's propaganda, and it shouldn't even be spoken aloud. On your behalf, I experienced that as a violence. And I wondered if that silencing had a similar impact on you.
It made me more sad than anything else. But it is a trauma, but it's one that from the moment that I decided that I was going to be a writer, trying to show representation of African-American culture, I had been subject to silencing. As an adult novelist, I was the first to write a novel about the Tulsa race riot. And, there was, insults from the KKK. The newspapers refused to even publish a book review or a profile of me. So over and over again, it seems as though I'm always trying to explore these issues, race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, everything, as a way of tearing down the bridges, tearing down the walls that divide us, and trying to use fiction to show an affirmation of how we can all bridge together and become one big human family. But it is something to get hate mail or to have someone judge you who doesn't know you about your intent. That's really just quite disturbing. Is it going to stop me from doing what I do? No, almost 40 years of writing, it hasn't stopped me yet. But I wonder what it says that somebody outside of a school board can have a school board interfere with the curriculum of professionals. And there was another incident in California where the book was banned, and it was banned on the word of one parent. So what gives one parent the right to decide, what kids can read and know about? The classroom in particular is about critical thinking, critical ideas, exploring. And I purposely, paid for a very special educator's guide to go with Ghost Boys to make sure that all points of view were represented. I included multi-ethnic characters to make sure that all kids felt represented, and that this was a problem of racism and bias that we could all work together to make a better place for all children in this world. So I also find it, if I'm making sense, I also find it really strange, and this has been the pattern of children's literature since literally the dawn of time, that adults always want to control what children read, what they're supposed to know, how they're supposed to feel. And one of the things about the 20th century, mid 20th century to now, is that we're getting this new diversity. We're getting more images of, childhoods that are not this homogeneous, white, happy childhood. We're getting, so many experiential, new experiences within the realm of fiction. So it's kind of like there are 30% Black Americans in Broward County. So I feel as though taking the book off the shelves preserves a kind of adult patronage of wanting to keep certain kids who are white, maybe innocent, but don't want to necessarily represent the very real trials that kids of color, who could be Black, Hispanic, Pakistani, whatever, sometimes experience in our country. And not only in our country, but also in schools. So Black Brother is about how racism and racial bias also affects children of color. And all of my books, Ghost Boys, Black Brother, you know, I go to the social scientists, I go to the statistics, I do the research, you know. Bias is not a made up concept. Racism is not a made up concept.
There were sort of two charges brought against you in this banning. One, that it wasn't true what you were saying, that you were putting forth propaganda, which you talked about, that you tried to find the truth and you tried to find the nuances to present it in such a way that it sparked discussion more than anything else. And then the other idea was that it was simply inappropriate for children to be talking about this material, which, you know, let's just be very real, since the summer of 2020, this is the issue that we're talking about. This like the police brutality, how it impacts our children, how it makes lives smaller and more painful. This is very much something that we're all bringing back with us now into this new school year. And so when I saw that Ghost Boys was being banned in May, it was like, well, you know, what a timely backlash to, because this is, they're saying we can't even have this conversation. So can you talk a little bit maybe about the ways that we as a society underestimate children and what they're capable of understanding and discussing and grappling with?
Well, I'm not an expert in psychology or social science, but there are in fact studies that show that children, very young children, toddler stage, actually are learning biases from the culture. And that as they grow, they're exposed to a popular culture, a media, or just maybe books that themselves don't show a full representation or diversity. They are being acculturated. There are instances when you can show an average fifth grader, you know, a white fifth grader, a picture of a Black kid on the floor and a white kid standing over them, and the children will say, you know, oh, the white person's helping the kid up. But if you reverse positions, then they'll say, oh, the Black person is keeping the kid down. And even the problem of little Black kids from the Atlanta study wanting, long time ago, and some, it's still going on today, having a preference for kids who are blonde haired and blue eyed, even though they don't represent or mirror the kids themselves. It's just appalling. So bias starts early. Kids are aware of it, I believe, or if they're not aware of it, if they're made to be thought aware of it, it might mean that they take that second to pause and think and undo it. How I explain it to kids is like bullying. You go into schools today and kids know you're not supposed to bully. And why do you bully? Oh, well, you don't wear the right clothes, or you're too short, or you don't come from the right side of town. And we talk about how that gets extended and becomes more forceful and powerful with actually racism and racial bias, that they're actually related. So it's sort of like a kid can all of a sudden go, oh, yeah, you're right. Am I then bullying someone simply because of their dress, their external appearance, you know? And that's wrong. And that's second to say, let me reevaluate, you know, is what, if we teach our kids that, then they won't grow up to repeat the same mistakes that a lot of adults still keep making, because we don't stop and think. If that makes any sense, you know.
That's right. It really seems to me that silence always supports the status quo. And if we don't even give kids an opportunity to discuss the things that are going on around them, they can't come to different conclusions.
Yeah.
Even if your book, you know, were very inflammatory and were to make people uncomfortable, I do think that we should question why we shy away from that discomfort.
Yes, you know, it's interesting because I have been to schools, you know, where a student has said, my daddy is a police officer, or I've had police officers write me. And I would say 97, 98%, there isn't a problem. And I think that's because of the underpinning of love, that everybody is treated with respect. And in fact, one of the things, I'm not trying to indoctrinate, I'm trying to have kids to remember to have self-compassion, self-love, and not to feel that they lack power. Kids are powerful. And that's why, I mean, the novel ends with Jerome saying to kids, bear witness, my tale is told. Wake, only the living can make the world better. Live and make it better. Don't let me or anyone else tell this tale again. Peace out, Ghost Boy. Generally, kids will stand up and applaud, particularly when I say to them, who's living in here? Who's alive in this auditorium? And they'll shoot their hands up and go, I am. So what does that mean? And they'll shout back, live and make it better. So the phrase in the novel is, you can't undo wrong. We can only do our best to make things right. And that everyone deserves to have their story heard, told, felt, shared across time. Those are the messages of this book. And I gotta say, kids get it. Kids healed me because they got what I was trying to do, that they were great literary and critical readers. Because once I finished this book, it had taken so much out of me, I thought, oh, I don't think I could ever write a book again. Literally, it took everything for me to try to make this book work in a way that was not hurtful, I felt, not harmful, but instead open discussion, you know? And it wasn't until kids started writing me letters from all over the world saying, wow, this makes me feel that I can do good in the world. This makes me feel that I can bear witness, or they'll send me artwork. That kids, just as with, say, bullying, want to see adults and everybody else stop bullying other people, though a stronger term, traumatizing, hurting other people just because of their gender, their religion, their sexual orientation, or the color of their skin.
Well, that was wonderful. And I just want to remind the audience that if you have questions for Jewell, you can drop them into the Q&A chat box, or even the chat box. I'll look at both in case you have any questions about the book banning or anything. I will just double check really, really quickly.
Okay. And while you're checking, Kelly, one of the reasons why I didn't respond to the first media reports of the banning is that I didn't want my words to be taken into sound bites, and that's not how you have the discussion. So I want to thank PEN America for letting me have the time to have this first ever discussion about my thoughts and feelings about Ghost Boys, because I feel as though, you know, there's a supportiveness for free expression. Well, I know there's a supportiveness for free expression, and also the idea of what is the purpose of literature. And it also means a great deal to me that I'm having this conversation with you, because as my daughter, it also makes me feel supported. Writing is a lonely, lonely act. And as an artist, my job is to really throw out my feelings that love conquers all, you know, and then to have hate come up, I'm not talking about the police superintendent, you know, whatever you're come about, variations of irritation to hatred from KKK members, to hate mail, to whatever. It can be sort of like, wait, what? You know, and so it's good to talk about this. And
well, yes, and I remember when this was all sort of going down as well, and I called you to check in with you, and you were feeling very raw, and there was a lot of pressure to respond at the time. But you're right about the sound bites. It's just, you know, and it was a lot coming at you. So I'm glad that you were able to sort of make a safe space for yourself. And also, there's something the author has said what they needed to say in the book.
Yeah.
And then I saw you getting this sort of hate back. I remember the hate me out mail, and you didn't know what to do with it, and you know how scary it was that sort of police were involved, which was such a strange echo of the story of Ghost Boys. And I was very proud of you for being able to respond. But I also remember thinking, I think because I had a little more distance than you did, that, you know, wow, her book is getting banned. That means somebody actually is picking up on its potential to be powerful and its potential to make change. That sort of fear reaction, I mean, it means that you were also doing something right. And I do grieve for any kids who don't have the opportunity to read the book, but I really did think that you were kind of a big deal.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I think that you're right, you know, that we've gotten to such a state sometimes that we forget that art was always intended, if you're art, you know, really trying to make art, that it does make people uncomfortable, you know, and that goes through all the stories, and that there is also a catharsis that can happen out of art, that you find a place for all these thoughts and feelings and emotions, and you can sort of like move them towards something that's more productive, you know, that you can heal by bearing witness, by recognizing what's painful and then noting what can I do to make it better. But I just want to say too, one of the things that does surprise me is how Black childhood is so problematized that, you know, Black kids, 12, 14, 15, you know, being killed because of racism and racial bias. It's sort of like, what? You know, with this idea that, oh, adults should nurture and love kids, you know, and not abuse them. And then you have one narrative that says, well, we want to protect these kids, but these kids, oh, they scare me. And therefore, you know, I can have a completely different response of non-nurturance. And that has been true since I've been aware of its truth since I was a little child, because I was a little girl when Emmett Till was murdered. And I remember trying to like wrap my head around what did he do? Of course he did nothing. And actually, you know, in that sense of what did he do is part of how the master narrative worked in my head as a child. And then having to dig at that story and learn he did nothing wrong, and having to take nearly 50 years for his accuser, Miss Carolyn Bryant, who said he sexually assaulted her, finally admits that she lied. So this whole idea that why is it that some narratives, you know, can be told, other narratives can't be told. And historically, we can't look at the framework from an Emmett Till to a Trayvon Martin, a Tamir Rice, or my character, Jerome, that we can't see that whole picture because it's too disturbing for some other group of kids. And I think that's where adults are being really irresponsible. All kids will increasingly live in a multi-ethnic, diverse world, and learning about human nature, regardless of whether somebody's tall, short, blonde hair, blue-eyed, you know, brown, you know, or purple, right? Learning to live with humanity is the fundamental skill for how we can keep our civilization strong.
Now, we do have a question from Nicholas. Why is the book called Ghost Boys?
Ghost Boys. Actually, great question. Actually, I knew, particularly from, you know, the civil rights era, pre-civil rights and slavery, that boy was used as a term for demeaning Black men, you know, that you could still be a boy even though you were 92 years old. And it was a way in which white power was asserted. So I knew that meaning, but I see ambiguity. I love ambiguity, but I also knew the meaning that these are kids. They are boys. If I said just in general, does any child deserve to be murdered? The answer would be no. And yet there's a group of kids who are not seen as kids. So I think it works on two levels, and maybe there are other levels. And I had intended to write a book about girls, but that will come some other time, because just as I was thinking about it, there was a book, Monday's Not Here Anymore, that came out that was also about the experience of the girls. But statistically, Black girls and boys are seen not sociologically as being more mature, as being less innocent, as being more problematic than white kids. You can find images on YouTube of a 5-year-old girl having the police called upon her. And they're putting the handcuffs on her and they don't fit because her wrists are too small. And she's crying, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. And then you can see her being put in the police car, right? This is available on YouTube. And I asked myself, what could a 5-year-old girl possibly have done that deserved to have the police called upon her? Why? What could it have been? And it's, of course, I can't think of any logical reason other than something having to do with racism or racial bias. But the incidences of racism and racial bias towards children of color impact their entire lives. That if you have an experience like that, you're most, whether in school or on the city streets, you're most likely not to graduate from high school. You're most likely to end up being in the prison system as an adult. That the trauma of that literally gets in the blood and in their bodies, that makes them more susceptible to, diabetes, hypertension, psychological issues in the future. So why aren't we protecting the innocence of all our kids? So ghost boys. Now, why ghosts? Sorry, I'm a professor.
Oh, yes, no. And also, just in case Nicholas was also looking for the more literal answer, one of the fascinating things about this book is you didn't tell the story of a police shooting sort of in real time in life where the climax is the shooting. You told the story that Jerome is shot, he dies on the first page, and then the story begins in his afterlife, which I thought was so powerful because, I mean, we see that play out on a national scale when these tragedies happen. We see that there's this after effect, these ripple effects of this story. There's a ghostliness to the tragedy.
Oh, thank you for adding that so much. And it is also true that I want to make all my characters multidimensional by having Jerome exist as a ghost and being able to see and respond. You see his growth over the book, to where he can get to the point where he says, Sarah, it's important that you saw me and I see you. There's also within African-American culture, the idea that the dead aren't gone, that the spirit still exists. So some people say this is magic, or this is ghosts, like, Casper the ghost, or like, ghosts in Harry Potter. No. This is my African-American culture where I was taught that, the spirit is still alive and that the division or the line between the living and the dead is very, very slim. So that spirituality is a reality of a lot of African-American cultural traditions. It's not magic. So I was also playing with that because I've had ghosts in other books before and people have said, oh, that's like witchery, so I've been sort of like, taken a task for that, or that's like, oh, that's not Christian. No, it's really just about an expression of how I was taught my culture and the cultural spiritual beliefs of the dead going on.
So James asks, do you like reading?
Yes.
And I would actually add on to that, James. That's a great question, and she's going to answer it. But also, do you like reading banned books? Which I think is a good question for the week.
Okay, very good, very good. Oh, I do like reading. I do. If I hadn't read as a child, I would have literally, I think, had a completely different life. Reading kept my sense of hopefulness, my sense of resilience. It kept it alive. And now get this, because here's the kicker. When I was a little girl, all the books that I read were written by white authors about white kids, right? Because there wasn't much diversity then, and there's still not enough now. And yet that didn't make the difference because it's still a human story, right? And I learned so much from Heidi and from Meg and Joe and Beth. I learned so much and I kept going. But when I found out that Black people wrote books, which I found out when I was a junior in college, I switched my major to English the very next day. So I intentionally in my books will mix up ethnic groups, Hispanic, Vietnamese, Choctaw, that I'm trying to show the representation of all the different ethnicities there might be, because that's what the world, that we all should be proud of and living in. But I love reading banned books Oh, yes. And my favorite banned book, though I can't believe it was a banned book, is Charlotte's Web. Ah, such a beautiful book about love, about trans. I could cry just thinking about Charlotte, even trying to beyond the grave, make it so that her good friend, the pig, isn't slaughtered. And she succeeds. That's so beautiful. And Kelly, I know you just read Charlotte's Web to your baby girl, my granddaughter. But yeah, so I that's my favorite banned book. Yes, you shouldn't ban any book ever. It's
Well,
like,
I remember back in the day, back when I was growing up, it was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry was banned. And I also remember that the trend was a little bit different. It was books with sexuality. There was The Higher Power of Lucky for using the word scrotum, the anatomical word. I remember that being banned. Anything that had to do with LGBTQIA issues. And then I just find the trends very interesting because now it's things that are sort of labeled as anti-police messaging. That is what's being banned. So you can see that in some way the banning isn't actually about the books themselves. Like they're a cipher in some way. They're just saying we don't want to be having this conversation that we're already having.
yes, I think that's a superb point.
And so we have a question from Leslie too. What responsibility does children's and YA literature have to the truth?
To the truth? Ah, wow. The truth, as in the big T. I think that's a sort of like, in a way,
I would say all the responsibility almost.
that's like, that's a big word. I'll tell you what truth I value most when I'm writing, and that's the emotional truth. Trying to make an experience so people can feel the emotional truths that different characters carry with them, carry inside themselves. So that's by paying attention to their thoughts, their feelings, what's beneath the surface. I'm hoping to draw complex characters, multidimensional, but I'm not trying to judge. I'm trying to love and explore. But I have always wanted to write for youth. I mean, I spent 30 years writing for adults, trying to get ready to write for youth, But because I'm a teacher too, a professor at Arizona State, I write my books for teachers. So when teachers use my book in the classroom, they have marvelous skills to actually expand and explode and explore. I write my book so parents can also take it and open up discussions with their children. It's not that I have one message, but it's a way to approach the complexity of complicated so-called truths, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so we have a question from Juan Manuel. What can you say about a solution to banned books? Which is a tough one, but I think honestly we're enacting the only solution that there is right now, which is having organizations like PEN America calling attention to these bannings, having news media continue to call attention to them, and then lifting these books up as much as we can to say, well, hey, someone has a problem with this, let's interrogate why.
Yes, and also I think because I'm writing for children, both of us, children and young adults, in your view, I would say that the Pennsylvania students for the recently, they banned all kinds of books of color, of children of color from the school. And the kids themselves protested, gave voice, said, no, why are you doing, what's wrong with learning about Ruby Bridges and segregation? And they actually got Pennsylvania school board, I think, to overturn that, and those books were returned back to the classroom. So in some sense, my time is moving on. I hope to leave a legacy with my books. Kelly with her own books is taking things to a whole nother level. And then behind Kelly are all these 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and even my 5-year-old granddaughter, that if we give them support for thinking independently, for being critical readers, and developing their own ideas, and I think they will naturally feel the power to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. I ought to have freedom of expression.
Yeah, and freedom to think and freedom to consider. So from Anna, we have, is it harder to write for youth than adults?
Yes. That's why I wrote for adults for 30 years. But actually, what I have discovered is that when I was writing my adult novels, and say like the Tulsa Race Massacre, Magic City, I was still saying, let's get rid of all kinds of discriminations and barriers that keep us as a humanity apart. So what I've discovered is that in writing my youth stories, I'm still carrying the same theme. I'm still carrying that notion, that we really are one. My grandma would say, Jewel, child, there's nobody in the world better than you, and you're no better than anyone else. We're all a mixed blood stew. So my grandmother, who never finished third grade, she already had the wisdom. And now Ancestry.com is showing that we're all related, that we're all descendants of Lucy, who was, a woman in Africa who they believe birthed the human race. And that skin color happened because some people moved north and they needed to get more vitamin D. Some people, were near the equator moving south, and so they needed darker skin to protect themselves, from the sunburn. So the whole idea that color has become this thing that separates us, that's a made up conception. It's just an excuse to sort of oppress another group of people. It makes you easily recognizable, if you look a certain way, but it doesn't mean that there's really only one race, and that's humanity. And that's what I'm trying to do. So in that sense, trying to find a way that doesn't depress a child, doesn't demean a child, doesn't scare a child, that keeps them open, and staging the different bits and pieces of information. So what do they need to know first? What do they need to know second? What do they need to know third? How do I, as a writer, create a story that can gently pull them along? And it is also, I think, a skill to keep a child reading, that literally I can write Ghost Boys and the child keeps reading. Why? And I think that they can feel that respect that I have, and they can feel the love and know that they are not going to be torn apart by the novel's end.
Leslie, do you mind if I just read one comment that we had in the question box?
Of course, please do. This is such a wonderful conversation. It's hard to see it end.
Yes, well, Julia wrote, thank you, Jewel, for your written words. As a psychotherapist, I've recommended your books to adults as a form of healing and coming to terms with the reality of trauma they've experienced. And this is another book that I will be recommending. So I just thought, in the context of book banning, that seems like the best recommendation, the best antidote.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. It warms my heart, and I've got to thank PEN America and Leslie, and I got to thank my daughter, thank all of you, because I feel, we're going to be fine, because we're going to make sure we're going to keep writing, keep speaking, keep empowering our voices, and we're going to make it fine for the next generation.
Absolutely. What a powerful note to end on. Kelly, Jewel, thank you so very much for a lively and inspiring conversation. I'm feeling ready to live and extremely powerful. That being said, one of the best ways to fight back against censorious threats to literature is to purchase and read banned books. So we encourage you to check out.
For catching that one. Yes, that's a good
and we encourage you to check out Ghost Boys and other titles by both Jewel and Kelly, which you can purchase through our indie bookstore partner, Books and Books, or through your local independent bookstore. If you enjoyed this event and want to hear the latest about what the PEN America Miami South Florida chapter is up to, please sign up for our newsletter. We'll go ahead and drop the newsletter registration link into the chat. We also want to encourage you to become a member of PEN America. You do not need to be based in South Florida to join us, so we would love to increase our chapter base at home in the Miami South Florida region. And we do hope to work with and meet with our regional members once it's safe for us to gather in person. For more information on how to become a member, you can follow the link that Rebecca just shared in the chat. Thank you again to all of our fabulous partners. We appreciate your support. Thank you to you, the audience, for spending your Thursday evening celebrating Banned Books Week with PEN America. As a note, all of our Banned Books Week virtual events will be available on pen.org next week. So please check those out. We encourage you to keep having these important conversations and share them with loved ones. You know, make sure that this network continues to spread so we can empower one another to really enact change. As always, please feel free to reach out to the Miami South Florida chapter. You can email us at penamerica.miami@pen.org. And with that having been said, thank you again, everyone, for such a fabulous evening and conversation. We'll stay on for just a little bit more in case anybody has any questions about what the chapter is up to. Otherwise, please enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care and rest in power.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Big heart. That's my heart. Bye-bye.